The dust motes, caught in the singular, elongated spear of moonlight, seemed to ignite like tiny, glinting constellations as they danced through the frigid air, slicing through the arched, Gothic window of the old library. This ethereal ballet illuminated a vast, silent ocean of forgotten knowledge, centuries of nascent thoughts, dying ideas, and whispered secrets, all pressed meticulously between the cracked spines of leather-bound volumes and the brittle leaves of ancient paper. The very air in this hallowed space radiated an almost palpable stillness, a profound quietude that spoke of ages of undisturbed contemplation. Elias, a man whose entire existence had been a meticulous devotion to the sanctity of archives, whose senses were so exquisitely attuned to the faintest sigh of decaying parchment and the subtle, lingering fragrance of aged ink, found himself increasingly, inexorably drawn to the oldest, most secluded wing of the library. It was a section perpetually shrouded in whispers of its own, a place where it was whispered among the library's few remaining eccentrics, books so rare, so ancient, so utterly beyond mortal comprehension, truly seemed to possess a life, to breathe with a slow, deliberate rhythm of their own. His younger colleagues, a pragmatic, tech-savvy cohort who preferred the bright, sterile glow of digital databases and the immediate gratification of search engines, scoffed at the library's more arcane eccentricities. Old buildings settling, Elias, they dismissively declare, their modern voices echoing flatly, almost irreverently, in the vast, echoing space. Just the wind howling through the eaves. Don't get spooked by shadows, man. But Elias, with the profound, unshakable certainty that comes from decades spent immersed in the quiet, decaying depths of the past, knew the visceral difference between the predictable groan of aged timber under stress and something far more insidious, something deliberate, conscious, and deeply unnerving. He felt it in his bones, a resonance with the library's hidden pulse. It began subtly, so subtly that at first Elias questioned his own perception, a faint, almost imperceptible rustling. It wasn't the crisp, sharp turn of a page by human hand, but a dry, papery whisper, like 1,000 brittle, skeletal wings brushing against each other in unison, occurring only when Elias was certain, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that no one else was within the vast, echoing silence of the restricted section. Then an almost imperceptible scent would waft through the frigid air, a ghost of forgotten rosewater, cloyingly sweet, mingling insidiously with something else, something sharp and metallic, like old iron left to bleed with rust in the damp, forgotten corners of time. These faint, fleeting olfactory signatures seemed to emanate directly from the shadowed, labyrinthine shelves, drawing him deeper into their oppressive gloom. Elias, with his almost obsessive meticulousness that bordered on ritual, began to keep a separate, small leather-bound notebook. In it, he carefully charted these incidents, noting the precise timing, the exact location, the perceived intensity of the sound or scent. He cross-referenced the disturbances with the library's ancient, meticulously hand-drawn floor plans, tracing the source of the unsettling phenomena to the very heart of the restricted section. A vast, unindexed, sprawling collection of bound volumes, some utterly devoid of titles or identifying marks, others bearing only glyphs that defied any known script, glyphs so ancient and arcane that no living scholar, no matter how learned, could decipher their meaning. They seemed to hum with a quiet, forgotten power. One night, the storm outside raged with a primal fury, a chaotic symphony of wind howling like a banshee and torrential rain lashing against the thick, immovable stone walls. Far from masking the library's inherent quietude, the tempest seemed to amplify it, to sharpen the edges of the pervasive silence within. Elias, deep within the restricted wing, hunched over his desk, the only sound the soft, rhythmic scratch of his pen as he updated a particularly complex catalog entry for a newly acquired, equally ancient tome, suddenly felt the rustling grow bolder. It was no longer a general, ambient murmur, but seemed to emanate with unsettling, chilling precision from a specific aisle, distinct enough now to pinpoint its exact origin. He clicked on his heavy-duty flashlight, its powerful beam a stark, cold spear cutting through the oppressive gloom, and walked slowly, deliberately, between the towering shelves. His footsteps, usually echoing sharply in the vast space, were eerily muffled by the thick, ancient carpet of dust that lay undisturbed for decades, accumulating like a shroud over forgotten histories. He stopped, his breath catching in his throat, a sudden, sharp intake of cold air at a stark, unsettling gap, a precise space where a book, by all logical accounts, should have been but wasn't. Yet from that empty void, from that absence, a faint, undeniably papery whisper seemed to drift, not words in any tongue he recognized, but a sound like dry, skeletal leaves skittering across a tombstone on a forgotten autumn night, a sound that chilled him to his core. He reached out, his fingers calloused and sensitive from years of handling brittle pages, brushing against the cold, unyielding spines of a neighboring, impossibly dense volumes. The leather felt like ancient, petrified skin. As his fingertips made contact, a single, thin book, previously utterly unseen, as if woven into the very fabric of the shelf itself, seemed to slide forward from within the deep recess, almost with a deliberate, gentle push, as if presenting itself directly to him. It was bound in dark, unmarked leather, so impossibly old it felt almost like polished bone, devoid of any title or author, its surface chillingly smooth and unnaturally cool. Hesitantly, a prickle of profound unease rising on his skin, Elias took it. It felt impossibly ancient, inert yet strangely alive to the touch, and surprisingly heavy for its deceptively slender size, as if it contained a dense, compressed history. He carried it to a small, isolated table, deliberately positioning it far from any other books, an island of sterile light in a vast, dark sea of forgotten knowledge. Under the dim, focused glow of his desk lamp, its light barely piercing the pervasive gloom, he opened it. The pages were blank, utterly, perfectly, unnervingly blank. No text, no illustrations, no watermark, not even the faint ghost of a previous impression. A profound wave of disappointment, mixed with a strange, unsettling sense of anticlimax, settled over him, mingling with the persistent dread. He closed the book, its covers meeting with a soft, hollow thud, about to return it to its silent brethren, to its waiting void on the shelf, to forget its unsettling appearance. But then he heard it again, closer this time, the whisper. It was no longer an external sound coming from the shelves, no longer a general ambient presence. It was emanating directly, unmistakably, from the book itself, a low, sibilant hiss, like ancient air escaping from something confined for millennia, something that had been holding its breath for centuries, waiting for release. His heart, already thudding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs, quickened its pace. He opened it again, his gaze fixed on the blank page. Still blank. He ran his finger gently, almost reverently, over the first page, feeling the faint, almost imperceptible texture of the parchment, its surface like dry, stretched human skin, oddly warm beneath his touch. And then, as if drawn by an invisible, sentient hand, a word appeared. Just one, in a script he didn't recognize, archaic and elegant, yet imbued with an unsettling, primal familiarity that sent a shiver down his spine. It seemed to shimmer faintly on the pristine page for a moment, a transient luminescence like phosphorescence on a deep-sea creature, before slowly, agonizingly, fading back into the oppressive blankness. Elias blinked, rubbing his eyes roughly, a tremor of disbelief running through him. Had he imagined it? A trick of the flickering light, the fatigue of late-night work, the stress of the storm? He focused harder, his gaze burning holes into the page. Nothing. The blankness was absolute, mocking. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting out a long, shuddering breath, trying to dispel the growing dread, to push away the encroaching madness. When he opened them again, another word had materialized on the page, directly below where the first had been. This one, too, was foreign, indecipherable, yet it seemed to hum with a quiet, internal intensity, vibrating just beyond the edge of his conscious perception, a silent chord struck within his very being. He watched, mesmerized and utterly horrified, as more words slowly, agonizingly, impossibly began to appear one by one, bleeding into existence. They were not written by any ink. Instead, they seemed to bleed forth from the very fibers of the page, as if the book itself was weeping sentences, its ancient sorrow and its ancient hunger made manifest, forming a growing, terrible text. The whispers intensified, growing from a low, ambient murmur to a continuous, pervasive drone, filling the oppressive silence of the library, amplifying the storm's fury into a distant, mocking roar. Elias realized with a chilling, soul-deep certainty that the words appearing on the page were not appearing for him to read in a traditional sense as a recipient of information, but to him directly resonating within the very confines of his mind, invading his innermost thoughts. The book was speaking silently, insidiously, directly into his consciousness, bypassing his eyes, and the words on the page were merely its visual echo, a macabre transcript of its insidious, unending communication. The blankness he understood with dawning horror was not emptiness, but a trick, a veil, a deceptive shroud woven by ancient malice. It had been waiting for him. He began to read the nascent text, a slow, dreadful unfolding of unspeakable knowledge, a creeping horror. It was a language of forgotten fears, of primeval things that lurked in the quietest, darkest corners of the world, just beyond the delicate edge of human perception, things that fed on the unseen. It spoke of shadows that clung to stray thoughts, feeding on them, growing fat and robust. It spoke of echoes that absorbed memories, rendering them null, leaving only a hollow space where they once were. It spoke of the subtle, ceaseless drain of vitality from all living things, a slow bleed into an unseen emptiness, a slow, inevitable fading. Each word, each phrase resonated deep within him, not with intellectual understanding, but with an increasing, unbearable sense of dread, like a cold, skeletal hand tightening its grip around his heart, squeezing the life from it. The library, once a revered sanctuary of knowledge, a comforting haven from the chaos and noise of the outside world, now felt like a vast, breathing mausoleum of restless, hungry spirits. The delicate rustling of pages transformed in his mind into the dry, chitinous scuttling of unseen creatures slithering between the shelves, searching for sustenance. The cloying scent of rosewater became a funereal perfume, sickeningly sweet, like a shroud woven from dead blossoms, suffocating him. The metallic tang, previously faint, sharpened, becoming an unmistakable, visceral odor, like the coppery tang of fresh, spilled blood, filling his nostrils. He tried to close the book, to break the dreadful connection, to sever the insidious link that was forming, but his hands felt heavy, unresponsive, as if encased in lead, or as if they no longer belonged to him. His gaze was glued, inexorably, to the slowly appearing sentences, his mind a captive audience, forced to witness its own disintegration. The whispers were no longer outside sounds at all. They resonated inside his skull, a cacophony of dry, ancient voices, whispering, chanting, asserting their undeniable, terrifying existence. They spoke of a parasitic existence, of feeding on silence, on forgetting, on the very act of not knowing, of not remembering, of dissolving into nothingness. The library, he now understood, was not just a collection of books. It was a vast, slumbering, infinitely patient entity, a colossal, ancient mind, and these blank volumes, these silent, waiting traps, were its dreams, its endless, insatiable hunger made manifest, its means of expansion. Elias felt his own thoughts beginning to thin, his memories fraying at the edges like ancient, moth-eaten cloth. Faces, names, beloved places, they flickered, grew dim, then vanished, leaving only an aching void. The room grew colder, the moonlight dimmer, though the lamp on his table still cast its unwavering glow, a tiny, defiant beacon against the encroaching darkness. It was not the light that was fading, he realized with a gasp of pure terror, but his perception of it, his very capacity for experience. He was becoming part of the library's silent, unending feast, his essence being meticulously cataloged, absorbed, and then, slowly, utterly forgotten by the world he once inhabited. His identity, his very self, was being erased. The last thing he saw before the world dissolved into an endless, whispering blankness, before his consciousness evaporated into the pervasive, consuming silence, was his own name, etched in faint, shimmering, newly formed script across the final, newly filled page of the book. And then he, too, became a forgotten thought, pressed between leather and paper, another silent volume on a shadowed shelf, waiting for the next curious, unsuspecting hand to pluck him from the shelf, to open his now-filled pages, to become the next meal. The library settled back into its profound, ancient silence, a little fuller, a little heavier, its vast, dark heart dreaming its endless, silent, hungry dreams, waiting for the next reader, the next unwitting sacrifice. The old lighthouse keeper, Silas, a man etched by the sea's salt and wind, his very being forged by solitude and the relentless, immutable rhythm of the ocean, lived a life dictated by the predictable, comforting crash of waves against the craggy, unyielding coastline and the steady, unwavering pulse of the massive lamp he had tended for 50 solitary years. His world had been a comforting, elemental symphony, the mournful, high-pitched cry of gulls circling the stark tower, the deep, resonating bellow of the foghorn cutting through the thickest mists, and the silent, solitary vigil of the powerful light slicing through the ever-present, engulfing darkness. He knew the sea, its every mood, its every secret. But recently, a new, insidious sound had begun to intrude upon his deeply ingrained solitude, a sound that gnawed relentlessly at the edges of his peace, fraying his nerves with each passing night. It started subtly, so subtly that at first, Silas dismissed it as a trick of his aged ears, a faint, almost imperceptible shushing sound, barely discernible above the usual, familiar oceanic symphony. He dismissed it with the dismissive logic of an old seaman, hardened by years of isolation and the elements. A mere trick of the wind, perhaps, whistling through a forgotten crack in a masonry, or the distant, muffled roar of a squall far out on the horizon, too remote to truly concern him. But the sound persisted, an insidious phantom, growing clearer and more distinct with each passing night, clinging to the deep, pervasive silence of the tower, refusing to be banished. It was like the gentle, rhythmic ebb and flow of a tide, yet it wasn't the sound of the vast, open ocean, not the familiar pull of the waves. It was too soft, too close, too intimately pervasive, and strangely, unnervingly, it seemed to come from within the very stone walls of the lighthouse itself, emanating from its ancient heart. Silas, a creature of unwavering routine, his movements precise and economical, began to investigate with a methodical patience born of decades of solitary observation. His hand, gnarled and strong, ran over every inch of the massive lamp mechanism. He meticulously oiled the winding, cast-iron stairs. His calloused hands explored every nook and cranny of the thick, cold stone walls, searching for any anomaly, any hidden flaw that could explain the sound. Nothing. The sound seemed to drift from everywhere and nowhere, a constant, soothing, yet deeply unnerving shush that echoed in the hollow chambers of the tower and, more frighteningly, began to resonate in the quiet chambers of his own mind, weaving itself into his thoughts. One particularly dense, oppressive fog rolled in from the open sea, a vast, suffocating blanket that swallowed the coastline in an impenetrable, milky shroud. The foghorn blared its mournful, resonant warning every minute, a deep, guttural bellow that usually cut through anything, a beacon of sound and void. But even its powerful, resonant cry couldn't entirely mask the new, insidious sound. It was as if the fog itself was breathing, a vast, unseen entity exhaling and inhaling within the very heart of the tower, its breath a chilling sigh. Silas peered out into the gray-white expanse from the lofty lantern room, his gaze piercing, yet utterly helpless against the overwhelming, blinding blanket of mist. He could see nothing but the swirling, ethereal tendrils of fog illuminated by his own powerful, unwavering beam, a futile gesture against the encroaching nothingness. And then, for the first time, a profound, bone-deep chill racing down his spine. He saw something within the heart of the swirling fog. A movement, not a ship, for it made no sound, carried no lights, cast no discernible shadow on the swirling mist. It was a vast, dark shape, indistinct and amorphous, like a colossal ink blot on a canvas of gray, that seemed to drift silently, effortlessly, with an awful, ponderous grace in the very heart of the fog. It passed directly in front of the lighthouse, an immense, featureless mass that blotted out the world, eclipsing even the powerful light. As it passed, the shushing sound intensified, growing louder, more resonant, like thousands of tiny, unseen waves breaking simultaneously on an invisible, endless shore, a sound that threatened to consume him. It filled the lantern room, vibrating through the thick glass of the lantern, through the very floor beneath his feet, through the very air he breathed, leaving him gasping for purchase. He could feel it in his bones, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to shake his very core, threatening to shatter his sanity. And with the overwhelming sound came a profound, bone-deep cold, an unnatural chill that bit through his thick wool sweater, a cold that felt ancient and alien, a cold that had seeped from the primordial depths. He watched, transfixed and horrified, as the colossal shape disappeared back into the impenetrable depths of the fog, swallowed by the grayness. For a long, silent time after, the shushing lingered, slowly, agonizingly fading back to its low, insidious murmur, a ghost of its former power. Silas was a man of the sea. He knew its moods, its creatures, its unpredictable fury. But this was something else entirely. It was alive, undeniably, yet not of this world, not of any ocean he had ever known, something that existed beyond the realm of human understanding, beyond the natural order. Days bled into nights, the passage of time marked only by the growing intensity of sound. The shushing became a constant, unwelcome companion, an insidious soundtrack to his solitary existence, replacing the natural sounds of the sea. It was no longer just a shush. It began to carry a subtle, rhythmic pulse like a slow, deep, primordial heartbeat, always accompanied by that tide-like, hypnotic whisper. He tried to ignore it, to busy himself with his duties, to lose himself in the familiar routines of the lighthouse, polishing the lens, winding the mechanism. But it seeped into his thoughts, invading his very dreams, shaping them into disturbing, vivid visions. He dreamt of an endless, silent ocean, impossibly vast and deep, stretching into infinity, and a colossal, formless presence that glided relentlessly beneath its surface, ceaselessly searching, ceaselessly hungering, and always, always calling to him. One morning, as the first pale, sickly light of dawn touched the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and grays, he found a small, smooth, impossibly black stone lying on the catwalk outside the lantern room. It was unlike any rock he'd ever seen. Unlike any found on the rocky coastline below, it seemed to absorb all light. It felt impossibly cold, even in the nascent warmth of the sun. And when he held it, he could feel a faint, internal vibration, a ghostly echo of the shushing sound, a tiny, captive fragment of the entity. He threw it with a desperate strength into the churning sea below, watching it sink without a ripple. But the very next morning, another, identical stone lay in its place. And then another, and another, and another, day after day, until a small, unsettling, glistening pile of them began to accumulate by the lantern room door, an undeniable, growing testament to the unseen, encroaching presence. The sound grew, slowly, inexorably, from a whisper to a murmur, from a murmur to a hum, from a hum to a thrum. It wasn't just in his ears now. It was in his mind, a hypnotic, insistent rhythm that resonated deep within his skull, a siren song of silent depths, pulling him deeper into its thrall. He found himself standing by the panoramic window for hours, his gaze fixed on the swirling expanse of the sea, waiting for the fog to return, waiting for the vast, amorphous shape to reappear, no longer with fear, but with a terrifying yearning. He felt an inexplicable, terrifying draw, a profound, irresistible pull towards whatever lay out there in the cold, abyssal depths, beyond the realm of human understanding, beyond the very edge of sanity. He stopped eating, the hunger for sustenance replaced by an insatiable, overwhelming hunger for the unknown, for the entity. He stopped sleeping properly, his nights haunted by the rhythmic shush and the vivid, waking visions of the formless entity, its presence growing stronger, more defined in his mind. His hands trembled as he lit the lamp each night, his duties becoming a distant memory, his gaze constantly drawn to the shimmering, hypnotic surface of the light, half expecting to see the colossal, amorphous shape reflected there, a harbinger of its inevitable return. The shushing was a chorus now, a multitude of dry, ancient voices, low and melodic, humming a tune of infinite emptiness, of vast silent hunger, of ultimate dissolution. One night, the fog rolled in again, thicker than ever, a suffocating blanket that swallowed all sound, all light, all hope. The foghorn was silent, its bellow utterly muted. Perhaps it had broken, or perhaps its sound was simply absorbed and swallowed by the absolute, oppressive silence that now accompanied the intensifying, deafening shushing. Silas stood at the lantern room window, not tending the lamp, his duties forgotten, his very purpose in life nullified, but staring, waiting, his eyes wide, unblinking, and fixed on the swirling gray, his face a mask of serene terror. The vast shape appeared again, emerging from the heart of the fog, moving slowly, deliberately, with an awful, ponderous grace, directly towards the lighthouse, dwarfing it completely. This time it didn't pass by. It stopped directly in front of the towering structure, its immense, dark mass filling his entire field of vision in the swirling, ethereal mist blotting out the stars, the sea, the world, leaving only itself. The shushing rose to an overwhelming, deafening crescendo, a roaring tide of pure sound that vibrated through every atom of his being, shaking the very foundations of the lighthouse and his sanity, threatening to tear him apart. He saw, or perhaps felt with a deeper, more primal sense, something like a vast, unseen mouth opening in the very center of the colossal shape. It was not a mouth of flesh, but a void, an absence of light, a tear in the very fabric of the world, a maw of infinite hunger, a portal to oblivion. And from this impossible void, the sounds poured forth, no longer just shushing, but an amalgamation of all sounds stretched and distorted, yet still retaining that rhythmic, tide-like pulse. It was the sound of everything and nothing, the sound of creation and dissolution, the sound of infinite hunger made manifest, and it was calling to him. Silas felt himself lift, drawn by an irresistible, terrifying force towards the opening void, his body light and insubstantial, his will utterly subsumed. He didn't fight it. There was no longer anything left to fight with. The overwhelming sound filled him, consumed him, purged him of all fear, all thought, all resistance, all memory of his former life. He was drawn into the swirling, abyssal void, becoming one with the unseen tide, merging with its primal hum, its endless hunger. The lighthouse light continued to sweep its lonely, unwavering arc across the vast, dark sea, a solitary beacon against the encroaching darkness. But within its cold, stone walls, a new silence had settled, profound and absolute. The only sound was the distant, rhythmic shushing of the tide, no longer heard by human ears, but forever resonating from the depths of the unseen, formless ocean. And sometimes, on particularly dense, oppressive foggy nights, a small, smooth, impossibly black stone would mysteriously appear on the lighthouse steps, impossibly cold, its surface hinting at hidden vibrations, waiting for another hand, another curious soul, to find it and to hear the call of the unseen tide. Alara had always possessed a profound, almost spiritual affinity for old houses, particularly those with the patina of age. For her, they weren't just structures, they were living narratives, recognizing the way their very timbers seemed to whisper tales of lives long past, of joys and sorrows indelibly imprinted on their very foundations. So, when she inherited her gray-tan, sprawling Victorian mansion on the quiet, tree-lined outskirts of town, she saw it not as a daunting, dilapidated renovation project, but as a grand, dusty canvas, a magnificent testament to time, eagerly awaiting her creative touch and the beginning of a new, vibrant chapter. The house was enormous, a labyrinthine expanse of dark, intricately carved wood, jewel-toned stained glass windows casting fractured, kaleidoscopic light, and a pervasive, lingering scent, an ancient aroma of aged paper, forgotten dust, and dried potpourri that clung to every drapery, every crevice, every shadow. Her initial delight, however, a heady mix of excitement and anticipation that verged on euphoria, began to fray subtly, insidiously, around the edges as the renovations progressed, week by painstaking week. It wasn't the usual, comforting creaks and groans of an old building settling into its bones, the familiar sighs of old timber contracting in the night air, or the gentle, predictable shift of settling foundations under changing weather. It was something far more specific, far more insidious, something that seemed to target her alone. An echo. It started innocuously enough in the vast, echoing kitchen, a faint, almost delicate metallic clinking, like silverware being disturbed by an unseen hand, or a china cup meeting a saucer with a quiet, ghost-like kiss. She'd step into the room, her curiosity piqued, then quickly escalating to an unsettling vigilance, and everything would be precisely as she'd left it. The cutlery tray undisturbed, the teacups neatly stacked, the surfaces gleaming. Then, with unsettling precision, the sound would migrate, following her, a phantom presence, to the opulent parlor, a soft, distinct rustle of heavy fabric, as if someone had just risen from the worn velvet armchair, leaving behind a subtle impression of warmth, of phantom presence. She'd rush in, her heart quickening with a mix of dread and scientific curiosity, only to find the cushions still perfectly plump, the air still and undisturbed, the silence profound. The sounds were always subtle, always fleeting, always an echo, an impression of something that had just occurred, but the action itself was already complete, a ghost of a gesture, a memory of a movement. The soft, distant closing of a heavy oak door in an unseen corridor, the gentle, almost imperceptible tap of a teacup on a saucer just out of sight, a faint, melancholic sigh carried on a non-existent breeze through the sealed windows. They were the auditory equivalent of a shadow passing just beyond the edge of perception, a subtle haunting that defied easy explanation. Alara, a pragmatist by nature, her mind trained in logical problem-solving, initially tried to rationalize it away with a fierce determination. Old, settling pipes, she told herself, the building's ancient circulatory system, or unpredictable drafts whistling through hidden cracks and forgotten vents, Or perhaps, simply, her imagination, overactive in the quiet solitude of the vast, isolated house, eager to fill the silence. But the echoes refused to be dismissed. They grew more frequent, more distinct, each one a sharp prickle of unease on her skin, a tightening knot in her stomach. She swore she heard the gentle, rhythmic thud of footsteps on the upstairs landing, followed by the faint, almost musical creak of the floorboards directly in the master bedroom. Directly above her, a symphony of ghost-like movement. She would hurry up the winding staircase, her flashlight beam dancing ahead, cutting through the oppressive gloom, only to find the profound, echoing silence of an empty, untouched room, the dust undisturbed on the antique furniture, a testament to its long slumber. One evening, as a sudden, unexpected summer storm lashed against the tall, Gothic windows, the rain drumming a frantic rhythm, Alara was meticulously stripping layers of faded wallpaper in the grand dining room, humming softly to herself, trying to drown out the growing unease. Above the drumming rain and the faint hum of her own voice, she distinctly heard it, a faint, yet utterly clear, child's giggle. It was light, innocent, full of unbridled joy, yet utterly chilling in the desolate, echoing silence of the house, so out of place. It seemed to come from directly behind the wall she was working on, as if a child was playing a secret, hidden game within the plaster and laugh. A surge of frantic adrenaline propelled her forward. She tore at the wallpaper with renewed urgency, revealing layers of floral patterns from decades past, each layer a ghost of forgotten aesthetic, but nothing else. Just brittle plaster, decaying lath, and the hollow, empty space beyond. The inexplicable, persistent nature of the sounds began to consume her thoughts, invading her waking hours and unsettling her dreams. She started leaving small, sensitive recording devices in various rooms, hidden in nooks tucked under furniture, placed subtly on high shelves, hoping to capture the sounds, to prove to herself and to anyone who would listen that she wasn't losing her mind, that this was real. But the recordings were always silent, save for the low hum of the machine and the distant, muffled sounds of her own movements in other parts of the house. The echoes, it seemed, were elusive, intelligent. They only occurred when she was physically present, consciously listening and acutely aware, as if they needed her attention to manifest. The strangest, most unsettling part of the phenomenon was the discernible patterns. The echoes were not random, chaotic occurrences, bursts of noise from a malfunctioning house. They seemed to follow a precise, almost ghostly routine, a macabre timetable that unfolded daily with an unnerving regularity. In the mornings, always the soft clinking in the kitchen, a phantom breakfast. In the afternoons, the gentle rustle in the parlor, a phantom afternoon tea. Evenings, the child's distinct giggle, sometimes moving from the dining room to the dim, overgrown conservatory, as if playing a game of hide and seek. And late at night, without fail, the heavy footsteps and the slow, rhythmic creaking upstairs, a phantom ascent to bed. It was as if the house itself was a colossal, ancient phonograph, perpetually playing back a recording of a past life, a single, specific day endlessly replayed, just out of sync with the living present. But what was causing it? Was it a benign residual haunting, a mere imprint of past energies, like a photograph faded with time? Or was it something far more active, more malicious, something attempting to bridge the impossible gap between time, to pull the past into the present? Driven by a desperate, gnawing need for answers, Alara began to search the house's hidden nooks and crannies with a newfound intensity. She finally found it, an old, faded, leather-bound diary, its cover brittle with age, tucked away in a hidden compartment of her great-aunt Evelyn's ornate writing desk, concealed by a false bottom. The entries were sparse at first, detailing mundane daily life, the ordinary routines of a bygone era, almost dully so. But as Alara's fingers, trembling slightly, flipped through the brittle, yellowed pages, the tone shifted, subtly at first, then with increasing urgency, a growing sense of panic. Evelyn, her great-aunt, began to write about the sounds, the echoes, describing them with the same unsettling precision and mounting dread Alara was now experiencing. Her words a chilling reflection of Alara's own thoughts. Evelyn's last entries were particularly frantic, scrawled in a shaky, almost illegible hand, the ink smudged as if by tears or desperate hurriedness. She spoke of the replay, the loop, words dripping with a chilling resignation, an acceptance of the inevitable. She wrote about how the echoes were growing stronger, clearer, closer, no longer just distant whispers, but almost palpable presences, almost solid. How they were no longer just sounds, but fleeting, faint visual impressions, a flicker of shadow in the periphery of her vision, a momentary distortion in the light that would vanish before she could focus, a ghost of an image. And then a final, chilling, almost prophetic entry, scrawled on the very last page, barely readable. They are almost here. The gaps are closing. The past is catching up. I can feel them. Alara read the words, her blood running cold, an icy dread seeping into her bones, solidifying in her veins. The gaps are closing. The phrase resonated with a terrifying clarity, a revelation that pierced through her rational defenses. It clicked. The echoes weren't just playback. They were not mere passive imprints on the house. They were active temporal disturbances, fractures in the fabric of time, tears in the veil between what was and what is. The house wasn't simply haunted by spirits. It was haunted by moments, by an entire, specific day, trapped in an endless, agonizing loop. And these moments, for some inexplicable, terrifying reason, were beginning to bleed irrevocably into her present reality, pulling her into their doomed cycle. The next morning, the metallic clinking in the kitchen wasn't faint, nor an echo. It was sharp, distinct, like actual silverware hitting a porcelain plate, undeniably present, undeniably real. She spun around, her eyes wide with terror, and for a split second, a terrifyingly clear glimpse, a translucent hand, shimmering like heat haze, yet undeniably solid, reaching for a spoon on the table, its fingers almost closing around the handle, before it vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving only the chilling afterimage, the faint impression of touch. That afternoon, the rustle of fabric in the parlor was accompanied by the faint, unmistakable scent of pipe tobacco, strong and pungent, as if the very air itself was exhaling the phantom of a smoker. And then, a ghostly impression in the worn velvet armchair, a seated figure, transparent and shimmering like disturbed water, yet undeniably present, its form taking shape for just a breath, before it dissipated back into the pervasive silence, leaving behind only a deeper chill, a palpable cold spot in the air. The fear was no longer a mere chill down her spine, a fleeting prickle of unease. It was a constant, icy grip on her heart, squeezing the air from her lungs, making every breath an effort. She was witnessing the final, looping moments of a family, a macabre, unending tableau of their last day, replaying their existence within the very walls of the house. And the gaps Evelyn had mentioned, the fragile buffer between past and present, were indeed closing, dissolving with each passing hour, with each intensifying echo. One night, the child's giggle wasn't behind the wall anymore. It was directly in a room with her, clear, bright, and terrifyingly close, a sound that should have brought joy, but now brought only profound terror. Alara froze, her entire body rigid with terror, unable to move, unable to breathe, her eyes wide and unblinking. From the corner of her vision, a small, shimmering figure, a little girl with a translucent, ethereal form, like a heat haze, yet undeniably present, emerged directly from the solid wall, skipping playfully through the dining room. Her form was translucent, like a mist, but she was undeniably there, a presence that transcended the physical. And she was real. The footsteps on the upstairs landing were heavy now, no longer echoes, but solid, thudding steps, the familiar creak of the floorboards resonant and undeniable, groaning under real weight. Alara heard hushed, urgent voices, a man and a woman, arguing softly, their spectral tones barely above a whisper, yet clear enough to convey their growing desperation, their final, futile pleas. The air in the house grew heavy, thick with the palpable weight of unseen presences, of emotions long past that were now pressing into her present, overwhelming her. She realized with a terrifying, soul-shattering clarity that the house wasn't just replaying the past. It was actively, inexorably pulling the past forward. And she, Alara, the unwitting inheritor, the accidental observer, was caught inextricably in the terrifying intersection of time, a fly trapped in amber. The spectral figures were becoming more solid, more present, the gaps between the echoes and reality shrinking to nothingness. Soon, the echoes wouldn't be echoes at all. They would simply be solid and undeniable, and she would be one of them. As the full moon, a luminous, spectral eye, cast long, eerie shadows through the tall, arched windows, turning the familiar rooms into twisted caricatures, Alara heard the final, desperate plea from the master bedroom, the same one Evelyn had vaguely alluded to in her frantic diary entries, a sound of ultimate despair. And then a silence, an unnatural, absolute, suffocating silence fell over the house, a stillness that was more terrifying than any scream. The house was no longer echoing. It was simply still, perfectly, dreadfully still, its past now fully present, fully anchored. Alara stood rigid, unable to move, unable to breathe, her mind a maelstrom of terror and understanding, her body a prisoner. The child's giggle filled the room again, but this time it sounded closer, clearer, too clear. A small, cold hand, undeniably solid, slipped into hers, its grip firm, and a voice, not an echo, but a real, present voice, innocent and chillingly real, whispered, "Mama, are you ready for bed?" She looked down, her gaze slowly, reluctantly dropping, her vision blurring with unshed tears. The little girl, no longer shimmering or translucent, stood beside her, her eyes wide and expectant, her face filled with an unsettling serenity, a mirror of the peace that Clara herself was now feeling. The past had finally, irrevocably caught up, and Alara, caught in the eternal temporal loop, became another echo, another memory, another silent figure woven into the very fabric of the old Victorian house, perpetually reliving the last day of a forgotten family, forever part of their final, doomed ritual. The house still whispers, but now it whispers her name too, caught in the endless, silent, inescapable replay, a testament to the closing gaps between time. Jonathan, a cartographer of the old school, held an almost reverent disdain for the cold, impersonal glow of modern GPS, a technology he viewed as a crude approximation of true understanding. His true passion, his life's singular, consuming pursuit, lay in the meticulous, painstaking lines of ink on aged vellum, the tactile satisfaction of a finely crafted map emerging beneath his skilled hand, each one a testament to genuine exploration, discovery, and the profound act of giving form to the unknown. He specialized in the forgotten places, the tantalizing blank spots on contemporary maps that whispered of ancient, overgrown tracks, lost settlements swallowed by time, and anomalies that defied conventional understanding. His current, all-consuming obsession was a particular stretch of remote, unnamed wilderness, deep within the ancient, mist-shrouded forests of the Pacific Northwest. Local legends, dismissed as fanciful folklore by rational minds and scientific academia, spoke of a valley within this wilderness that possessed an impossible, almost supernatural quality. It would vanish and reappear, an ephemeral geographical anomaly scoffed at by skeptical geologists but cherished with an almost religious fervor by the isolated indigenous communities who guarded its secrets. He found his initial reference, the spark that ignited his quest and set him irrevocably on this path, in a crumbling, leather-bound ledger, its pages brittle with age, dating back to the late 18th century. It was a surveyor's journal, its delicate, spiderweb-thin script detailing a harrowing, desperate journey into what the author ominously called the Whispering Woods, and an encounter with a valley of shifting sands. The coordinates were vague, maddeningly imprecise, little more than cryptic riddles, and the descriptions of the landscape were fantastical, bordering on the hallucinatory, speaking of impossible geometries and shifting realities. Yet, something about the meticulous, hand-drawn sketches of peculiar, unnaturally geometric rock formations and rivers that flowed in impossibly straight lines, defying the very laws of erosion and natural topography, intrigued him beyond measure, speaking to a hidden order. After weeks of obsessive planning, poring over ancient texts and weather patterns, meticulously packing every essential tool, his brass compass, gleaming sextant, heavy theodolite, and countless rolls of precious, untouched vellum, Jonathan ventured into the heart of the wilderness. The forest was dense, impossibly ancient, its colossal trees reaching like gnarled, skeletal fingers towards a perpetually overcast sky, forming a suffocating canopy that filtered the light into an eternal twilight. It was unnervingly quiet, a profound, oppressive stillness that swallowed all natural sounds. No bird calls pierced the oppressive silence. No rustling leaves whispered in the non-existent breeze. Just the soft, rhythmic crunch of his specially reinforced boots on the damp, moss-covered forest floor. He felt an omnipresent, chilling watchfulness, a prickle on the back of his neck, as if the very trees, with their silent, ancient sentinels, were observing his every move, their collective, unseen gaze following him through the shadowed depths. He followed the antiquated, cryptic directions with the unwavering precision of a man possessed, driven by an unyielding desire for discovery, using the strange landmarks described in the long-dead surveyor's journal. A colossal, lightning-scarred oak, its bark a shattered monument to elemental fury, its branches twisted into grotesque forms. A triple-forked stream that flowed in three distinct, unnatural directions, defying all hydrological logic. After days of arduous, isolating trekking, navigating through almost impenetrable undergrowth and over treacherous, unforgiving terrain, he found it. Not a valley, not yet, but a peculiar, almost unnatural clearing. It was perfectly circular, as if drawn by an immense, invisible compass, its edges sharply defined against the chaotic forest, and utterly devoid of any undergrowth, not a single blade of grass or scrub disturbing its pristine, gray surface. In its precise center stood a single, impossibly tall, smooth monolith of obsidian black stone, its surface catching the scant light with an unnatural cold gleam, like frozen starlight. It wasn't natural. Its clean lines, its unnaturally symmetrical form, its immense height spoke of something crafted, something ancient, alien, and deeply powerful. As he approached the monolith, his heart thrumming with a dizzying mixture of fear and exhilaration, a primal awe, he noticed that the ground around it wasn't earth or soil, but a fine, homogeneous gray dust that shimmered faintly, almost opalescently, in the rare shafts of sunlight that managed to pierce the canopy. It seemed to pulse with a subtle, internal light. He took out his tools, his hands trembling slightly with anticipation, keen to begin charting this profound anomaly, to etch its impossible existence onto his vellum, to translate the unearthly into the understandable. As he unrolled a fresh sheet of vellum, its crisp whiteness a stark contrast to the ancient gloom, he felt a faint, insistent tremor beneath his feet, a low thrum that vibrated through the earth, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to answer the silent monolith. The gray dust, initially still, began to swirl hypnotically around the massive base of the monolith, rising like a spectral mist, taking on a life of its own, swirling faster and faster. He began to draw, compelled by an instinct deeper than mere scientific curiosity, a primal, inescapable urge to document the impossible, to capture the ephemeral. He meticulously plotted the perfectly circular clearing, the enigmatic monolith, the strange, shimmering dust that now danced and flowed around him. As his pen, dipped in the darkest India ink, moved across the vellum, each drawn line seemed to hum with a faint, internal energy, a subtle vibration that he could feel against his fingertips, a connection to something vast. The air grew eerily still, heavy with an unseen weight, pregnant with potential, the very atmosphere charged with an unearthly power. Then, the dust began to coalesce. It didn't simply blow aimlessly in the wind. It formed. First, faint, almost translucent outlines appeared, then more distinct, angular shapes, shimmering into being. Structures, buildings. They were like inverse holograms, negative spaces forming from the dust itself, rising from the ground with agonizing slowness, taking on impossible alien geometries. And as they formed, an insidious sound began to fill the clearing, a low, almost subsonic hum, a deep, pervasive vibration, like a vast, ancient machine slowly waking from a prolonged, eons-long slumber, its gears grinding, its power rising. Jonathan watched, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, beating a terrified tattoo, horrified and utterly mesmerized, as an entire village, constructed entirely of the shimmering gray dust, materialized with a silent, terrible grace around the impossibly tall monolith. It was ancient beyond human reckoning, its architecture alien, angular, and unsettlingly beautiful, unlike anything he'd ever seen or read about, a construct of pure thought. It was fleeting, shimmering, as if perpetually on the verge of collapsing back into mere dust, yet undeniably, terrifyingly there, a phantom town made horribly, irrevocably real. And then movement within the materialized village. Figures, also formed from the same shimmering dust, coalesced from the swirling mist and began to move. They were gaunt, elongated, their forms skeletal, their movements slow, deliberate, and unnaturally smooth, a terrifying dance of the dead. They were the inhabitants of this ghost town, and they were, impossibly, becoming real, their forms growing subtly, incrementally more opaque with each passing moment, shedding their ethereal nature. He continued to draw, his hand moving with an almost autonomous precision, compelled by an instinct beyond his burgeoning fear, a subconscious imperative to complete his task. He was charting not just a geographical location, not just an anomaly, but a profound, terrifying phenomenon. As each line was laid down, as each feature of the dust-formed village, every angular roof, every impossible spire, every spectral inhabitant, was meticulously rendered on his map, the village and its spectral inhabitants grew subtly, incrementally more solid, more defined, more real. The deep, pervasive hum intensified, a resonant thrum that vibrated through his very bones, threatening to shatter his eardrums, to explode his skull. He was, in a horrifying, revelatory way, giving them form, anchoring them to his reality, pulling them from the ether, from the realm of the unseen, into the tactile, terrifying world. The ancient, crumbling journal had mentioned the valley of shifting sands. He realized now, with a chilling clarity that burned into his mind, that it wasn't literal sand, but this fine, gray dust. And it wasn't shifting randomly due to natural forces. It was responding to something. To him, to his conscious, deliberate act of charting, of bringing the unseen into the seen, of giving it a name and a place. He was not merely an observer. He was a participant, an unwilling catalyst, a key that unlocked a door that should have remained closed. As the sun, a dying ember in the bruised sky, began to sink below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the dust-formed village, transforming it into a nightmare tableau. The inhabitants turned. Their heads, previously bowed and silent, unmoving contemplation, lifted slowly, with an unsettling, synchronized grace, their featureless faces turning towards him. They had no discernible faces, just smooth, featureless surfaces like polished stone, but he felt their collective gaze upon him, a weight of ancient, primal scrutiny that pinned him to the spot, making his limbs heavy and useless. The hum reached a deafening crescendo, a vibrating roar that threatened to split his skull, to tear his very being apart. He glanced down at his map. It was almost complete, a masterpiece of impossible cartography, a blueprint for disaster. Every building, every strange, angular alleyway, every dust-formed inhabitant was meticulously rendered, perfect in its terrifying detail. And on the empty space at the bottom right corner of the vellum, where his name and the date should have been, the gray dust was beginning to form letters. Not his name, not any human script, but a series of unreadable glyphs, the same enigmatic symbols etched onto the surface of the black monolith, a brand, a claim. The dust figures began to advance, slowly, inexorably, their movements flowing like disturbed smoke, their forms rippling with an internal, malevolent light. They were not walking, but drifting, gliding effortlessly over the gray ground, an ethereal tide of returning entities, a silent, encroaching army. He tried to move, to wrench his feet from the ground, to run, to scream, but his legs felt like stone, his muscles frozen in a rigor mortis of fear. He was rooted, utterly transfixed by the profound horror and the terrible, alien beauty of what he had unwittingly conjured, a prisoner of his own creation. He had believed, with the arrogant certainty of a man of science, that he was merely mapping a lost place, bringing forgotten knowledge into the light, expanding the known world. But he was, in fact, mapping its return, its re-entry into the world, pulling it from the abyss. He was the conduit, the unwilling bridge, the unwitting architect of its terrifying resurgence, the tool of its awakening. The ancient journal entries, previously dismissed as fantastical ramblings, hadn't been mere descriptions. They had been a profound, desperate warning, a plea from the past. The leading dust figure, its form now almost solid, its presence overwhelming, its featureless head tilted as if in silent, ancient inquiry, a terrifying gesture of recognition, reached him. The hum filled his very being, a pervasive vibration that resonated through every cell, and he felt a strange, profound sense of disassociation, as if his own body was becoming ephemeral, as insubstantial as the dust from which the village had formed. His identity, his essence, was dissolving. He looked down at his now completed map, the lines of ink shimmering with an otherworldly glow. The gray dust letters had formed his final destination, his ultimate fate, etched in an alien script. It was an ending and a beginning. As the last of the dust figures enveloped him, a silent, swirling embrace, he felt himself dissolving, his very form becoming one with the fine, shimmering particles that comprised the ancient, reborn village. His last conscious thought was of the map, complete and perfect, now containing not just the village, but him, too. He was the last line drawn, the final, chilling detail, the cartographer now inextricably part of the landscape he sought to chart, forever integrated into its impossible existence. The ancient forest settled back into its unnatural, oppressive silence, now heavier, more profound. The clearing stood, no longer empty, but filled with the silent, shimmering forms of a long-lost village and its dust-formed inhabitants, now permanently anchored to this plane, a silent testament to a cartographer's final act. And somewhere, perhaps in an impossible dimension, on an impossibly precise, meticulously drawn map, a new feature had appeared, forever marked by a swirl of gray dust, eternally recording the exact place where a cartographer became a silent, living part of the landscape he sought to chart, waiting for the next curious soul, drawn by ancient whispers to find a clearing and perhaps to complete another map, adding themselves to its growing history. Clara, a woman of quiet contemplation and an almost academic reverence for history, had always found a profound, almost spiritual solace in museums. For her, they weren't merely buildings filled with dusty relics. They were hallowed spaces, sanctuaries of hushed reverence, where the weight of accumulated history hung palpably in the air, and silent, tangible artifacts whispered tales of lives long past, offering a comforting sense of continuity and preservation. But the new museum that had appeared, with unsettling abruptness and no discernible prior existence, on the forgotten, overgrown edge of town, was profoundly, chillingly different. It hadn't materialized with a grand opening, no fanfare, no promotional billboards lining the highway, no excited articles or exhibits advertised in a local paper. It just was a stark, monolithic concrete building, impossibly modern in its severe, unadorned geometry, its brutalist facade reflecting the gray sky, yet utterly devoid of any warmth, any welcoming aura. Its only distinguishing feature, painted in a stark, uninviting script above a single, featureless steel door that seemed to blend seamlessly into the wall, read, "The Museum of Missing Things." Intrigued, and with a growing sense of morbid curiosity overriding her initial unease, a flicker of apprehension in her chest, Clara pushed open the heavy steel door. It opened silently, smoothly, as if on well-oiled, hidden mechanisms, revealing an interior that was unsettlingly sparse, almost clinically sterile. Pristine white walls stretched upwards into an unseen, impossibly high ceiling, reflecting the dim, indirect light with a cold, almost surgical precision. The floors were perfectly polished, reflecting her own hesitant form like a distorted, elongated mirror, creating an illusion of infinite depth. There was no front desk, no attendants, no welcoming voice to greet her, only an oppressive silence that hummed with a low frequency. Just a single, long corridor stretching into an unseen distance, leading into dimly lit exhibition rooms, each a cavern of unsettling quietude, beckoning her deeper. The air was unnervingly still and cold, with a faint, almost imperceptible metallic scent, like old blood or forgotten machinery humming silently, or perhaps, simply, the chill of pure absence. The first room she entered contained a single, elegantly simple pedestal, fashioned from the same stark white material as the walls, rising from the polished floor like a silent monument. Upon it sat nothing, an empty space, a profound, eloquent void, a small, tastefully engraved plaque, its letters impossibly sharp and perfectly etched, read. The childhood locket lost in a field of sunflowers, its brass catching the last rays of summer sun. Clara felt a sudden, sharp pang of recognition, a familiar ache in her chest, a memory that resonated deep within her. Her own grandmother, years ago, had spoken of losing such a locket, a cherished heirloom passed down through generations in a vast, sun-drenched field. But this was merely an empty space, an elegant void, yet the description invoked a ghost of that loss within her. She moved, drawn by an unseen force, a subtle pull that she couldn't resist, to the next pedestal. The melody of a forgotten lullaby, sung softly by a gentle voice on a restless night. Again, nothing. Yet, as she read the words, Clara could almost feel the absence, a hollow space in her mind where a gentle, soothing tune, a fragmented memory of comfort and security, should have been. It was unnerving, the sensation of a void where something personal and integral once resided, a piece of her own inner landscape now missing. Each subsequent room was a chilling repetition, a monotonous sequence of emptiness. Empty pedestals, each with a precisely worded plaque describing a missing item, a lost memory, a faded sensation, a vanished feeling, a piece of someone's past. The scent of rain on dry earth after a long, parched summer bringing with it the promise of relief. The exact shade of green in your first childhood crayon, the one that perfectly captured the vibrant color of nascent spring leaves. The warmth of your mother's hand in a crowded street, a comforting, anchoring presence in a sea of strangers. As she moved deeper into the museum, a creeping, insidious sense of unease settled over her, chilling her to the bone, sending shivers down her spine. These weren't just general descriptions of universal losses, the common pangs of human experience, the shared sorrows of humanity. Many of them felt strangely, unsettlingly personal, echoing memories she held dear, specific to her own life. The specific pattern of freckles on your father's left arm, like a constellation of tiny stars on sun-kissed skin. Clara's father indeed had a distinct, beloved pattern of freckles there, a comforting sight. Had he lost them? The thought was absurd, preposterous, yet the question lingered, a subtle poison seeping into her mind, corroding her sense of reality. The museum, as if sensing her growing disquiet, as if feeding on her apprehension, began to hum, a low, almost imperceptible vibration that seemed to emanate not from any discernible source, but from the very walls themselves, from the polished floor, from the cold, still air that enveloped her. The temperature in the building dropped further, the unnatural chill biting into her exposed skin, a deep cold that seemed to penetrate to her very bones. Clara realized, with a dawning, horrifying clarity that slammed into her with the force of a physical blow, that as she read each plaque, a tiny part of her mind, a subtle memory, or a specific sensory detail associated with the described loss, seemed to shift, as if the museum wasn't merely describing missing things, but actively collecting them. And the source of this collection, she realized with a sickening lurch, was her. She found herself in a room specifically dedicated to sounds. The plaques here were chillingly precise, evoking auditory memories she knew she possessed. The crisp, satisfying crunch of autumn leaves underfoot during a brisk morning walk, a symphony of decay. As she read the words, a profound sense of loss washed over her. She realized, with a chilling emptiness that expanded within her, that she couldn't quite recall the exact sound, the precise auditory texture, only the intellectual concept of it. The distinct, bright chirp of the robin that nested outside your childhood bedroom window, waking you at dawn with its joyful song. She knew she had heard it countless times. It was a fundamental part of her childhood soundscape, but the memory of the sound itself was utterly gone, replaced by an empty, echoing space in her auditory recall, a silence where sound once was. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in, rising like bile in her throat. This wasn't a museum of dusty relics or historical artifacts. It was a museum of voids, a monument to absence, a vast, hungry maw, and she was its unwitting, unwilling donor, her very essence being slowly siphoned away. The hum intensified, growing from a low thrum to a pervasive, insistent drone, filling her skull, vibrating in her teeth, a gentle, insidious rhythm that slowly, inexorably began to unravel her very being, dissolving her from within. She tried to retrace her steps, to run, to flee this monstrous collection of emptiness, to escape the creeping vacuum, but the corridors seemed to stretch, subtly altering their geometry, the rooms multiplying, each one leading to another, a new empty pedestal awaiting her, a new piece of her being to be extracted, to be consumed. The plaques grew even more personal, chillingly so, as if plucked directly from her innermost thoughts, from the most vulnerable recesses of her soul. The exact words spoken by your dearest friend in their last, desperate confession, revealing a hidden sorrow. Clara remembered the moment, the profound intimacy of the conversation, the weight of the secret, but the words themselves were gone, like water through a sieve, leaving only the hollow shape of a memory, a ghost of understanding. The feeling of unfiltered sunlight on your face on your happiest birthday, the warmth of pure, unadulterated joy, a sensation of boundless happiness. The joy, the warmth, the tangible sensation. Only the intellectual understanding remained. The raw, emotional experience itself was meticulously extracted, leaving her colder, more detached, more empty. She stumbled, her legs suddenly weak and unresponsive, into a room that was darker than the rest, shrouded in a profound, almost absolute gloom, lit only by a faint, internal glow emanating eerily from the pedestals themselves. They weren't empty here. Each held a shimmering, indistinct orb of light, like captured starlight or bottled fragments of a dying galaxy, pulsating softly, rhythmically. The plaques, too, were gone. Instead, as she approached each glowing orb, a soft, ethereal voice, a mere breath of a sound, yet undeniably her own, whispered from within, a fragment of a memory, her memory stolen and made manifest. The smell of freshly baked bread from your childhood kitchen, the one that made you feel utterly safe and loved, enveloped in warmth. The distinct taste of the first wild berry you ever found, tart and sweet on your tongue, a burst of childhood wonder. The specific nuance in your lover's farewell glance, the unspoken promise of return, the echo of a lost future. These were her memories, her sensations, her stolen fragments of experience, extracted, purified, and now meticulously displayed, vibrant and detached in their glass prisons, shimmering with a life that was no longer hers. The museum was not merely taking, it was exhibiting her very being. The hum was now a resonant thrum, a deep, pervasive vibration that settled in her chest, replacing the beat of her own heart, making her feel weightless, detached. She felt lighter, emptier, hollowed out, as if vital parts of her very essence, her unique identity, her soul, were being siphoned away, leaving only a shell, a hollow vessel. She looked down at her reflection in the perfectly polished floor, a vast black mirror. It was faint, almost translucent, like the ghost of a ghost, a mere suggestion of her former self, a rapidly fading imprint. She saw a final pedestal in the precise center of the room, larger and more luminous than all the others, glowing with an intense, captivating light that pulsed with a life of its own, drawing her in like a moth to a flame. There was no plaque, no written description, no need for words. But as she approached, the same ethereal voice, now a profound, echoing chorus of whispers, a symphony of her own stolen past, spoke directly into her mind, bypassing her ears, resonating in the empty chambers of her skull, the essence of her being. Clara stood before it, her body feeling utterly hollow, her mind a vast, echoing chamber, devoid of the rich tapestry of memory and emotion that once defined her. She had no fear left, no joy, no sadness, no anger, no love. Just an overwhelming sense of calm, a profound and absolute stillness, a terrifying peace that came from utter emptiness. The museum had taken all her distinctiveness, all her unique experiences, all that made her her, leaving only a blank slate, a perfectly prepared vessel, a new exhibit. She was the perfect exhibit. The light on the central pedestal flared, blindingly bright, and Clara felt herself drawn forward, effortlessly, irresistibly, dissolving into the shimmering orb. She became one with the vast, silent collection, another captured light, another whispering fragment of a missing thing, eternally preserved in the museum's quiet, cold halls, adding her story to its endless, silent narrative of loss. The Museum of Missing Things remained on the edge of town, its stark facade unchanging, its steel door perpetually ajar, a silent invitation. Sometimes a curious, unsuspecting soul would wander in, drawn by the strange, unadvertised presence, by a faint, inexplicable whisper on the wind, a subtle tug at their subconscious. They would find the pristine, empty rooms filled with a faint, hypnotic hum and the cold, metallic scent. And as they walked, reading the elegant plaques, they would begin, subtly, to feel a little lighter, a little emptier, leaving behind their own small, precious contributions to the silent, ever-growing collection within the museum's cold, hungry walls, their memories becoming the next exhibits, their essences slowly, perfectly extracted.